All right. Yeah, welcome everybody. This is going to be a talk about level design, my level design process specifically. My name is Reinhard Ruland. I used to be a student at BUas when it was called NHTV or IGAD, International Games Architecture and Design. Um, let's just kind of jump in. So, a little bit about me before we get started. My experience, I have worked on a variety of different, relatively big projects. I spent a few years at Ubisoft working on Ghost Recon Breakpoint and Rainbow Six Extraction. Spent about 2.5 years working on an unannounced project with Hangar 13, which sadly got canceled. Worked on State of Decay 3 as well as Delta Force Black Hawk Down, which was kind of a Battlefield challenger. And I'm currently working on a big project with Electric Square that I can't say anything about, but I am super excited when it will be announced. Um, so what are we talking about today? We are talking about level design process. So for me, why I made this talk and what this talk is about is that I kind of wanted to write down all the steps and stages, the questions that I ask myself when I get started on a project. And so first, a couple of disclaimers. So this one, no universal truths. When you work on level design for a game, there is no singular answer because every game requires a specific solution, and level design as a discipline is different on every project. So I've done my best to kind of try to abstract some of these ideas that are kind of specific to a specific game or a specific genre and try to be as broad as I can. And that may mean that this may come across as basic to some of you. Maybe it won't. We'll see. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of follow-up that I could do in a later talk that's more specific to a specific type of project that I've worked on or that is very common. But just keep in mind that everything that is ever going to be correct about how to do level design is kind of case by case and specific to the thing that you're working on. Um, One of those things that's going to be different depending on what you're working on is going to be your tools, right? So working on a project is also working with the tools. And so sometimes what might seem like a less optimal way to do something in one engine can actually be way more efficient in another engine. So try not to be too critical of like, this is the one way I know how to do things, and kind of be a little bit more open to kind of changing your process if your environment changes. Um, One of those things related to process is like how documented and how kind of bureaucratic the process for your project is. I've worked in places where, it's the equivalent of like every form needs to be triple filed and quadruple checked before you're allowed to check a Boolean. And I've also worked in places where people would just break the rendering pipeline because they wanted to try something new, right? So I would say the latter kind of is a lot more open to creativity, obviously. So you get a lot more cool ideas. But if you let people go too far, it can also, slow other people down massively if they, like I said, break the rendering pipeline. And now all these other people have to fix your mess and kind of stop working on what they're working on. So as always, there's not a right or wrong way of how bureaucratic or how Wild West should your project be. It's kind of case by case, but I think it's more about kind of what you're trying to create. Like, if is it relatively formulaic, then maybe bureaucracy is efficient. Are you trying to be revolutionary? Then creativity is maybe so necessary that you have to invite that chaos a little bit. So another thing that's kind of very case by case is ownership. So level design as a discipline, it's very hard to define because it's one of those that's kind of flexible to fit the mold of what the project needs. So sometimes level design can be mostly just scripting, and in some cases that scripting can almost look like programming, like maybe not C++, I think that's kind of rare, but at least like C sharp, like you would have in Unity or some other like Lua style scripting language. You might find that as a level designer, you're in like, scripting or visual scripting way more than you ever are putting down cubes, right? And sometimes, there's not a lot of QA on the project, so you are the one like triple checking and testing your work a lot. So, this can lean into art side, etc. Um, I think another thing that I've found over the years is like you may have a specific workflow of how you like to do things, and that's totally fine. But I wouldn't try to impose your way of doing things onto other people. If you join a new project and you see that everyone is using like kit pieces to assemble their environment, at the very least, I'd be open to kind of like looking at why they're doing that and what's efficient about that and kind of giving it the old college try to see if maybe there's something to their process that kind of can level up your process instead of kind of sticking to what you know. But on the other hand, I think there is value in saying, look, this is the way that I work efficiently. This is the way that I can very quickly get something done, right? So, like with everything, I'm kind of saying the answer is a little bit, it depends. Um, but you are allowed to kind of stick to your process if you're more efficient. But, everything in moderation, like, don't be stubborn about it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And related to that, if you see a colleague or someone you admire or something doing something that looks dumb, you're like, I don't understand why you're doing it this way. Give it a second. Like, try to understand. If they are getting good results doing something that looks stupid to you, maybe it's not that stupid. And as you'll see in like later in this talk, there's a lot of stuff here that I talk about kind of aspirationally. I'm not perfect. Like some of these things I write down also for myself because I want to adhere to this more. Um, but yeah, we're all getting there. So let's jump in. So I think for me, the very first thing when I want to work on a level for a game, what I'm looking for is the brief. Now, some of you may have had briefs. Some of you may not even know what I mean when I say brief necessarily. So we'll dive into that. But basically, I'm talking about the context. Like, what is the information that you have right now about the game that you're trying to make that will inform the choices that you make as a level designer for what type of level you're going to create for your game. The problem, if you don't have a good brief and you don't have a lot of context, is that you're going to make something like what you're seeing here on screen. You're going to be like, oh, what does a level look like? Well, it has a terrain, it has water, it has trees, right? And you're going to plonk those down kind of haphazardly and you're going to struggle to make it feel like a real place. It's going to kind of just look like, someone opened the editor and dropped a bunch of trees down. So how do we get there? Like, what are some of the things that we need to make areas stand out and interesting? I think the first thing is to kind of look at it from the perspective of landscape. So like height verticality, is this a very vertical area? Is this a very flat area? Where is our elevation coming from? Is it very concentrated in certain spots? Is it all over the place? Flora, like what type of plants and trees can grow in this area? Is this a very like densely forested area, or is it very sparse, like maybe the odd oasis in the desert type of thing? And then fauna, like are we gonna run into any type of animals? Like again, from the gameplay side of things and from the like prototyping side of things, you don't necessarily need to put all this in the engine, but it's more for your own brain to kind of build a picture in your head of where are we, right? So I'm not necessarily saying make a giant feature list of all the things that you're going to need, but kind of for your own mental image, like what does this part of the game look like? Like where are we? So when we know where we are kind of in a physical sense, the next thing is kind of the people that exist in this world that we're creating. And I think for this thing, the thing that's very important is to try to make it so that the people that you meet in this world aren't generic, right? And I think one way to do that, there are many ways, but one way to do that that Horizon is quite good at is kind of like using visual design of clothing and makeup and just general like character, like how people talk, what they say, what their values are, to kind of put people into groups, to kind of say, oh, this is how this clan thinks, this is how this group of people think. And it's great because it means that in this game, when you then run around the environment, if you see somebody dressed a certain way, you have all these context clues about them. You know, kind of, are they going to be aggressive towards me? Are they going to be friendly towards me? Are they going to be very gruff, or are they going to be very like, explanatory and scientific mumbo jumbo? blah blah blah. But being conscious about, what are the people in this world? How do they relate? And especially, how do they contrast? Like, how is one set of people different from another set of people? And why does a player give a shit? Like, what does that do for the player? Is the difference in clans, for example, like in Horizon, a plot point? Are we trying to illustrate that these people broke away because they had differences of opinion in how society should be run? That's a good way to kind of be like, okay, this is why we are diverging. Another example I want to point you to is from Genshin Impact. I think Genshin Impact is really smart because they basically just link towards the real world. They've kind of just picked countries. They've picked like top right is Germany, top left is Japan, middle left is India, bottom left I think is like Atlantis, like Italy slash Greece, ancient civilization but futuristic, and bottom right is China, right? So we have all these like cultural, yeah, basically, like if you've ever heard of the word cliche, this is the value of a cliche. A cliche comes with all these preconceived notions. So if I just see somebody walking around the top right image, I'm going to think, oh, they're probably kind of like Germans, right? And I'm going to use my cultural knowledge of Germany to fill in how these people behave compared to the people in the top left who are from Japan, right? So it kind of gives us these building blocks to shortcuts, I think you can say. I think cliches are shortcuts. It's like in a second I can go, oh, that looks Japanese. I'm sure these people are Japanese. That might tell me something about, oh, maybe they're very isolationist or that sort of thing. But again, even if you're making like a fantasy world or whatever, if you are consistent in the language you use for your architecture, for how one part of the world looks compared to another part of the world, then people can start to make that connection of like, oh, this house looks blue. There was a blue city very far away. Maybe this person moved here and like struck out on their own and decided to build their house, stuff like that. I think another thing for a good brief that is very important is kind of like what has happened, is currently happening, or will happen in this world. So here's an example from Elden Ring. I don't know the specific moment, but I'm seeing a big dragon. So I'm just going to pretend and say, like, let's say you arrive at the city and you see like this dragon. Maybe the dragon has turned to stone, right? Past event. It's like, okay, at some point, this city was besieged by a big dragon and now it has calcified. That's cool. Maybe the dragon's alive and it's like, oh no, like in the current moment, this city is being, besieged by a dragon. But when we talk about, the future, this is basically me talking about returning to a place, right? If we can do a state change where we can say, oh, this city looked intact the first time I visited, and now that I came back, this certain section of it has been destroyed. And I think the most important thing for this type of thing is whether or not you can do stuff that the player will care about, right? I think a bad way to do something like world events, in my opinion, is like the Fallout franchise for the most part. Like a lot of areas in Fallout, there's just chaos and destruction everywhere. And so it kind of just becomes background noise. It's like, oh yeah, there's another burned out car. Whereas if you can be a bit more specific, and especially if you have the resources to kind of lean into telling the story of the place, like I guess to sing Fallout's praises, Fallout New Vegas, if you've played it, has a town where the Caesar's Legion, I think, is doing like a lottery, and everybody who loses the lottery gets like basically strung up like Jesus, and everybody who wins gets to walk free. But that's a way to like kind of tie a story around like a physical environment and kind of tell your story visually, like environmental storytelling, in a way that as a player, I don't even have to engage with that quest at all. I can just walk through, see these like kind of crosses that people are being tied to, and it tells the story for me, right? But it's even better if I can then read like diary entries, or I can talk to people, or I can engage physically with this quest to kind of make that environmental storytelling relevant and interesting. Because otherwise it's background noise and I might just like it might just blur together like the 50th like burnt out car on the highway. So if we have a lot of area context, I think the second part of a really good brief is gameplay context. And by the way, I maybe should have prefaced this. Everything I'm saying here about brief, what I'm saying is, in a perfect world, this gets given to you. In the real world, this will not be given to you, and you have to kind of fill in the gaps, right? And either that is like you making shit up, or you kind of like proposing to the team, like, hey, what if we said that the area context is blah? What do you guys think? What if the people are blah and the area is blah and the way they dress is ABC? Anyway, continuing. So on the gameplay side of things, again, in a perfect world, what you're given solves this problem. So I call this the left mouse button to shoot problem. It's where your game has almost no verbs, like almost no buttons to press, and so the game is extremely boring because the only thing you ever ask me to do is click the shoot button, right? And so I'm not even thinking at that point. I'm just going like, is something moving on the screen? Yes, point, shoot. Like there's no interesting decisions being made in my head. So how do we get away from that, right? Well, what we need and what we want is player verbs. So what I mean when I say player verbs is basically an action that you can trigger either by pressing a button or by contextually pressing a button in a certain moment, right? So this is the difference between like contextual meaning if I press A normally during the game, I jump, but if I press A while standing next to an NPC, I talk to them, right? Like that's contextual, whereas in some games, pressing a button always does the exact same thing. Anyway, player verbs. Um, I think the second thing that if you have a game that has combat in it is, it's one thing to have enemies in your game, but when I say enemy archetypes, what I'm saying is there a distinct difference between what type of behavior an enemy is eliciting from the player? Is the enemy pushing me to behave differently? So these examples are from Destiny 2, and I'll kind of briefly walk through them. The fallen captain on the left is a guy who has a shield that regenerates, and he usually comes with some buddies. So he likes to kind of hang back, and he kind of takes pot shots at you, and if you really rush at him, I think he'll like attack you for a little bit and then back off again. And so his main thing is that he wants to kind of whittle you down. He doesn't want the full on confrontation. And so the challenge with him is that you need to kind of rush at him and kind of, blast him down with enough damage to make sure he dies before he like regenerates. The guy in the left middle, the hive, forget what they're called, but the grunts from the hive, they're rushers and they're melee rushers. So they tend to come at you in groups and they come very fast. So what that does for player response is either I must focus on them and try to mow all of them down before they get to me, or I must run away and kind of like Call of Duty zombies that kind of have them running after me for a while. Now, the Vex soldiers on the right are kind of a variant of the Hive in the sense that they also kind of march towards the player, but they have a rifle and they are quite slow. So they're a bit more of like a progressive advance. And so as a player, I'm not panicking as much and I'm more kind of like calculating in my brain, okay, how many seconds until they get to me? So it's kind of a nuanced difference where I kind of think of it more as like territory control, like how much territory is the Vex eating as they get closer and closer, and do I have enough time to shoot them before they get to me? And then the last example, the Cabal guy here, he likes to kind of like jump if I'm correct, and he has like a sword, like a blade on his hand that he can slice at you with. So his main thing is that he punishes if you're like hiding behind cover too much. Like he'll come find you, but he can kind of like jump, so he's not like walking in a straight line towards you. So again, all four of these, hopefully it's clear to you all, they ask the player to do something different. And sometimes they will also negate certain verbs, right? So the fallen captain, if you shoot, because in Destiny you have this thing with like different elements, and you have to match the right element to break the shield. If you are being kind of brain off and you're just pressing the shoot button at the fallen captain, not only does his shield keep regenerating, but also if you're not shooting with the right element, you may not even break his shield, right? So it's kind of a way to say, stop, player, stop doing the same thing you've been doing all like the last hour. Try something else. Throw a grenade, use an ability, like swap to another weapon. So hopefully that's what your enemy should be doing in your game. They should be incentivizing specific actions and sometimes disincentivizing or even blocking actions that people are very kind of common to gravitate to, the kind of spam in that way. Anyway, moving on, level mechanics. So a level mechanic can be pretty much anything, but the way I would define it is like, what is a thing that shows up in this specific piece of content that you don't really reuse, right? So it's kind of like, well, some people would say wasted work, but it's kind of like not very scalable ideas that you want to really explore in one area and then not really bring back. Um, and obviously, the thing that's really, really good about it is contrast. Like, it's so unique. It's like it's happening in this level and nowhere else, like this Clockwork Mansion from Dishonored 2. So it's very memorable, right? It's a good way to make one area of the game distinct from another area. It's also very expensive to produce. So this really requires like a lot of work from, the design team, the art team, the tech team to strike that balance between making it unique enough, but also, to some degree reusable maybe, like maybe you can evolve the idea in a later level, or cheap enough to achieve. Um, but really what I would say all of this is kind of culminating into is like, whatever direction you want to go with it, it is a really good idea to kind of think for your level, what is my one cool thing? And you probably have had classes about like unique selling point or something along those lines. But I think the reason why I like the term one cool thing instead of unique selling point is that it doesn't necessarily have to be like a feature or like a verb or like a button. It can be like extremely cool visuals or something, or like a really impactful story moment. The one cool thing doesn't always have to be a mechanic. It definitely is stronger when it has a interactive component to it. But I want to kind of broaden your expectation and your thinking in terms of what your one cool thing can be, because that means potentially it's cheaper, right? Potentially it's easier to realize and it's less something that you're gonna like tunnel vision on and kind of, build the whole game around. Um, Now this slide, I kind of put it halfway in here. Maybe I should start with it because this slide really to me encapsulates my entire philosophy of like game design broadly. Contrast is everything. So I really believe that the thing that makes video games exciting and interesting and most of human experience exciting and interesting is contrast, is like, new stimuli, seeing something new. But specifically in the context of level design, what I mean by this is that, you know, you don't you are looking to create contrast at every sense of scale. You are looking to create contrast in the second to second loop, the minute to minute loop, the hour to hour loop, all the way up to the game to game loop, right? Again, unique selling point. If you want your game to stand out from other games, what you're looking for is called contrast, basically. But the example here, again, this is Destiny 2. This is a exotic quest called, it's called the Whisper, but you get a sniper rifle called Whisper of the Worm. And the reason I love it as an example is because it hits so many different scale levels of contrast in one mission. It starts off being this thing where I think you have to do a little Easter egg to even unlock the mission, which is something up until that point they hadn't really done, I don't think. And then they keep kind of either doing things they haven't really done before or just switching what the level is about often enough that it feels so epic. Like for one, you have this like pretty strict time limit. I think at the time it was something like 20 or 30 minutes. I think they bumped it up now. So it's like, okay, you have one chance today for 30 minutes to try to finish this mission that you've never seen before. Otherwise, it's gone for the day and you can try again next week. So there's a sense of urgency of like, oh no, I have to figure this out quick and I can't fuck up. And then there's a lot of different types of environments that push different player verbs. Like maybe the first section is a lot about platforming, and then the second section is a lot about like precise jumps instead of like fast jumps, or you know what I mean, like, or it's about shooting short range, long range. It's about like, being in a very constrained space while the enemies can kind of come at you from many different sides. Anyway, doesn't matter, I'm blathering on. But I think this mission is a really good example of doing something very unique and also doing a lot of different things at the
Can I
same
stop
time.
you one moment,
Yes,
Reinhard?
please.
I just like want to say that I love the fact that you bring this up, contrast, because contrast also when it comes to art is like one of the most important features to have. So continue. Thank you.
Yes, please. So yeah, okay. Like I was saying earlier, right? If you have a brief and the brief's not very good or the brief's kind of vague and you're like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with this, like I don't really know how to make something interesting. After the brief comes the pitch. And whether or not, sorry, we'll get there. Like whether or not you are actually asked to do a pitch, which I think y'all will have done through your courses, where you have to kind of pitch. This is our idea for the game. But if you're working at a job and someone says like, "Hey, go make a level," like here's a rough outline of what the level needs to be about. Even if no one is asking you to make a PowerPoint and pitch, whatever you do next is the pitch. Like whatever you create will be the pitch, whether anyone says it is or not. So treat it accordingly. Anyway, this next section I call not enough reference, which I'm sure Neville will also enjoy because every single time you get stuck in your level design and maybe other parts of game dev too, and you don't know what to do next, it's because you don't have enough reference. You're not giving yourself enough context to figure out what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. You're just trying to make it up, and that's hard. So I call this blank page syndrome, which is a very common thing, and I've definitely had it where I don't know where to begin. So, as someone who has many times not known where to begin, here's some tips and tricks. So, when you're making a level, I think one of the things for your pitch that's important is the theme to scale. If you've agreed, like, oh, this game takes place in a hotel and we're going to have this cool story happening where, like, the hotel explodes and you got to escape and, like, you're running down corridors and the corridors twist and turn and then the floor falls out and blah, blah. Okay, but if we're talking about a little bed and breakfast, like up in England, the corridor is like 20 meters. Like you can't do all that. So your idea is kind of fits in this really big continental type of hotel. But if your environment art team is looking for references of cute little cottages, because that's where we started, we were like, oh, we're going to have a little mystery game in the little cottage. Well, now you're not theming to scale. And I've seen this happen in professional AAA contexts a lot of the time where, everyone agrees, oh, the game's going to be this cute little, like, small scale environment. And then the designers are being asked, oh, make me this super epic environment where you're going to do all these things and it's going to be 10 minutes long and you're going to run. And it's like, okay, I don't have that kind of scale, man. Like, I don't have the room. So be very aware when you are thinking, where is this level happening? Do my references match the scale of the experience that I'm talking about creating? Because if you really are stuck with like a little bed and breakfast, your only real solution is to be like, well, there's a secret underground tunnel network. You know what I mean? And at that point, you're kind of abandoning the whole theme because you're not really leaning into what makes it unique as a little bed and breakfast anymore. You're just going underground tunnels. So another thing in terms of, finding references for yourself, what I like to do is I like to look at the real world as a point of reference, not to copy directly, but to give myself like scale references. So I made this level, which was like a mountain trail, and it was based on an old project I did in Breda for my first level design class, where we had to make a multiplayer level, where I felt like I didn't do the place justice. I didn't do the reference justice, so I wanted to give it a second try. And this is, I think, Taro Paktsang. It's like Tiger's Nest in Bhutan. And I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna build a level about a mountain trail. I don't know how big mountain trails are. So I was like, okay, well, let's look at Google Maps, like take a top down of Google Maps and just see how much space does this real mountain trail take up. Now, obviously, what you're going to find is when you try to translate reality into a video game, everything that's an exterior, you have to kind of shrink, and everything that's an interior, you have to kind of balloon. And there's two different reasons for that. But in terms of the exterior, it's because, like, in the real world, if you go walk to the grocery store or whatever, that might be like a 10-minute thing. But if that was a video game, you're just holding forward for 10 minutes. That's not exciting. But your brain is kind of condensing that experience to when you think of you going to the grocery store, you're kind of doing the thing where you walk to the grocery store at like 10x, 50x speed in your head. Like you're skipping all of that to get to the interesting part. So it's the same thing in a game. If you've ever looked at like an open world, like GTA's like LA or New York in GTA 4, it's not the same size as real New York. They've kind of compressed a bunch of neighborhoods and picked a few interesting buildings and kind of, condensed 5 square kilometers down to like 500 square meters or something along those lines, right? Anyway, we'll get to the reverse. But yeah, I think for me, this is a big one is like when you're looking for reference, I definitely have made that mistake earlier in life where I would kind of form this idea in my head of what I wanted, and then I would try to find images that kind of matched the idea that I had in my head. That's hard. You know what's a lot easier is to look at actual reference and then try to build your idea with those references. So you just kind of like you go looking at things that are vaguely in the direction of your theme. So let's say like it's a hotel and you're like, okay, I'll just go look at big hotels and try not to get too attached to what you want your hotel to look like yet. Just kind of go look at things and details that interest you and then kind of build your vision around that. Um, Related to that, I have this concept that I learned from a level designer who worked on Uncharted and he worked at Media Molecule for a long time. He's called Peter Field. He introduced me to this idea of macro versus micro references. So a macro reference is the guy on the left. That's more of like a vibe, a place, a theme, if you will. It's like, oh, it's a monastery built into a rock face. That's cool. So that's kind of giving us references for where are we? What does it look like? Micro reference is kind of just like a prop. It's like, I want this gate. I think this gate looks cool, so I want this. And I'll make something like this in my level. But it's a way to kind of categorize why you like things. And it's a way where you can kind of, as you're looking at these references and letting them inspire yourself, you can kind of categorize in your head, oh, I like this bit of this image. I want this bit of this image. Or you can say, I don't care about the details of the architectural style, but I like the vibe. I like how wide and open it is. I like how many verticality layers it has, or whatever. So the next step is to kind of localize your references. So what I mean when I say this is you're kind of building your idea in your head of what the level is going to look like by kind of stringing together the images that you've found. You're kind of saying, okay, well, first what you see as the player is roughly like this image, maybe with the micro references from these images, and kind of use that to build your image. And then the next room is going to look like this, or 5 minutes later, when we round the corner and climb the mountain, the next big shot is going to look like this. And that's a way to kind of build a much better, richer image in your head of what is going to happen and what's going to take place in that level. And then we'll make it a lot easier to actually build those out. Because now you have all these spots where you can basically just kind of build what's in your images, right? Obviously, with don't directly copy it. Steal from many places. Don't steal from one place, please. Um, but yeah, if you've done that and you've created a pitch that you really like and that people approve, you're going to start going into Engine and you're going to start going into 3D. So I call this the scale test. I've seen on LinkedIn a level designer from Call of Duty that's been in the industry for 20, 25 years. He calls this rough out, related to blockout. I like the term rough out, but I came up with scale test, so I got to throw that in there. But basically, what this is you kind of putting your 2D ideas into 3D and kind of seeing if kind of testing your assumptions. Is what I thought what was going to work actually working? And the reason you're doing that is you're trying to avoid this. You're trying to avoid kind of very unreal, haha, unreal, get it, spaces. You, when I look at an image like this, I'm kind of like, I kind of get what they're going for, but it kind of looks like a children's play box or something. It's like maybe they're containers on big stacks. Like, I don't know where we are or what's happening here. Like, it doesn't look like a space that's real. And it's probably because there wasn't enough reference. Like, I'm sure they had a vision for where this level takes place because I think I see like a crane, like a lift over there, but this doesn't look like any warehouse I've ever seen. So one thing that can help, especially if you have a very big level, like if your level has many, many rooms, let's say, this is an image from when I did like I never finished this, but I was working on making like my own Zelda dungeon. And so Zelda dungeons have many, many rooms, and the rooms can kind of be grouped into themes. And so I wanted to kind of make a little bubble flow chart to tell myself, how do these rooms connect? Let's not worry about how big every room is and what kind of architecture is in every room. Let's just figure out the spatial relationships between the rooms and how I expect players to flow from one room to the next. And that's where a bubble flow chart like this, again with localized references, can be helpful to kind of build that image in your brain of what this is going to look like. Now, if you want to do kind of more of a top down of like, okay, this is the actual space, this is what the level is going to look like. For me, I really, really prefer working on the grid because to me, it's a problem solving tool. If I start and I have that blank page syndrome and I have no idea how big my level should be, being on the grid is a way to give me that anchoring because I can tell myself, oh, well, maybe this room is a kitchen. A kitchen has a table. I know how big a table is. I know how big a chair is. I know how big a fridge is. And you can start kind of putting these objects that you know are going to be in the space and then using them as a way to say, oh, therefore, I need the room to be this big because I need the player to be able to comfortably navigate around these objects that I know are going to be in the room. So for me, for that reason, I really like using like 1 meter, half a meter grids to build rooms on, because then everything starts to click together Lego brick style. If you like to work without scale, that's fine. I'm just calling it out as a tool to kind of give yourself more anchoring points to kind of figure things out. What I will say though is if you have any sort of stuff in your level that's not square, like these circular shapes that I had in one of my levels, I really suggest you use some type of layering software like Photoshop or Krita, I think, is like a free alternative to make sure that you can kind of iterate, right? If someone tells you, oh, I like this idea, but the circle should be bigger, or oh, I like this idea, but it shouldn't be a full circle, it should be a half circle, and then we should go somewhere else. Well, it's going to be a real pain in the ass if they're all on one layer to kind of like, erase everything and then redraw things, and then before you know it, you're off the grid and you're in no man's land. So I really highly recommend layers if you're ever off the 90-degree angle. But if you are on the 90-degree angle, I don't think it's as necessary. I think it's relatively easy to redraw stuff, so up to you. But I like using layers. I think when you're on the 90-degree grid, the pro of using layers is that, again, if you have like different rooms, it's easier to kind of group something and to say, I want to move that entire group, that entire room further up or further down, blah, blah, blah. So I always use layers, but kind of up to you if you're on the grid. Um, a maybe easy common thing that y'all are doing or maybe you're not doing, I don't know. But in Unreal, at least, it's pretty easy to import an image and just set it as a cube, like texture, a texture on a cube. And then it's like a floor plan. And now it's relatively easy to go back and forth between 2D and 3D as you're doing the scale test to kind of see, oh, is my drawing too big or too small? Right? And you can kind of iterate back and forth between the two mediums. So if you didn't know that, there's a hot tip. When I'm in this phase of doing the scale test, obviously because we're adding the third dimension, the main things I'm interested in all have to do with stuff that's hard to tell on 2D, right? So compared to my character, how big do spaces feel? But also, if I was planning to have verticality, like, do I feel like I'm asking the player to rise and fall too much, right? Is it boring? Do I have to add a million staircases because I really want to be high in this section and I want to be really low in this other section? Again, you'll be surprised at how common of a problem this is in AAA, but I'm always like, can we have a glider? Can we have like a zip line? Can we have like a giant bouncing jump pad? Can we have stuff that'll quickly make us go up and down? Because if we don't, as a level designer, I'm gonna get so annoyed because I have to make so many staircases. And there's nothing worse as a player than being asked to like go down a rotating staircase. Like you're just rotating the camera the whole time. That feels terrible. So you'll be surprised at how much like going up and going down is a nightmare for level design because it almost always requires either fiddling with the camera or like pressing the jump button all the time. So that's kind of what we're testing in the scale test, other than scale itself, like width-wise. Um, Another one we're testing is vistas, right? Like we said, oh, when we get to this thing and we're going to round the corner, we're going to have this beautiful framing shot of the monastery temple. Are we? Let's test, right? Like put it in 3D, give it a little look, and be like, is that about how much I want that to be framed, or should it be bigger on my screen? Should it be smaller on my screen? And also, do I want to see this thing multiple times? If so, how does it look from the next angle? That sort of stuff. I think if another thing that was really important is kind of back to that thing I was talking about with the walking to the grocery store for 10 minutes is and also player verbs, I guess, that I was mentioning earlier, is the variety in your traversal. As I'm getting from the beginning of my level to the end of the level, what am I asking the player to do in terms of buttons that they're pressing in order to get there, right? Even if you say like, oh, well, we can swim and we can run and we can jump and we can climb, okay. But if you're doing all of them concentrated in one spot, it's like we have 5 minutes of just swimming and then 5 minutes of just climbing. That's not very exciting. Like you're asking me to do the same thing for a very long time. So kind of keeping in mind like how many times am I asking the player to press the exact same button? Is there something I can do to switch it up? Like, for example, with the beams in the top left, if I'm asking you to like swing across beams, is there something I can do to make it so you're not just doing the exact same distance of beam swing 50 times in a row? Like, can I change how far away they are? Can I make it so some of them are moving up and down and others are static? Or maybe one of them, unexpectedly breaks. They do this a lot in Uncharted, where it's like, oh no, the thing you were on is about to collapse. You better jump quick. Like these are all ways to kind of break that monotony and that pattern of like asking the player to do the same thing over and over again. So this is something I'm very aware of in the scale test. Um, so we've done a scale test. The kind of rough shapes are in, and everyone's like, yeah, that looks like a video game level. Next, you're going to go through iteration on the space. Um, and this is where you are going to hopefully, if you're in a good project, get a lot of feedback. A lot of people are going to say, more like this, more like that, more up, more down, more sand, more water. And this is where I think it's really important to kind of learn to put your ego aside and to kind of yes and people and to kind of say, well, let's give it a try. I think my biggest thing that I've learned and that I try to tell people is like, you can't ask people to just trust me, bro. You have to kind of show them. So the more you can be like not an asshole and say, no, that's not my vision, and more kind of say, okay, well, let's try. Let's show. Let's give it a shot, right? And kind of show people. Whenever I get feedback that I think is dumb, then that I don't agree with, I do my best to implement it as fast as possible so people can see that it's dumb. But they have to see. I can't just say, trust me, it's bad. I think a key concept when you're making spaces that people need to understand that I think sometimes on the art side people struggle with a bit more is this is a video game. We are not making the real world. So what we're looking for is believable spaces, not real spaces. So this example is from Jedi Fallen Order, and it's the moment when I kind of lost it. I was like, this is hilarious. How the fuck did you guys ship with this? So Jedi Fallen Order is a lovely game, really cool. It's very level design forward. Like it's a good reference for a game where you're like, this is basically a blockout that art has dressed up as best they could. But art's probably like, Jesus Christ, man, like really? You want me to make these cubes look good? This is stupid. What are we doing? But this level, I think, is the worst offender, where there's just this moment where you're like wall running along one of the like these brown like oil vats, and there's like a few stormtroopers in like a little viewing deck, and you kind of round the corner, and there's just no wall. Like this is an oil refinery. And at this viewing deck, there's no wall. There's just oil fumes like drifting up in there. And I'm like, yeah, that for sure, like art didn't have time to kind of make this look better, and design was just like, no, those are the verbs. Like this feels great to play, and it does feel great to play, but it's a little stupid and a little silly, right? But it's a reminder that like I'm a level designer. I noticed that. I think 99% of people didn't even blink. Like they're busy playing the game. Who cares, right? Like it's fun to play. So you're creating believable spaces. You're hoping that people's immersion doesn't snap and that they go, oh, this is fake. That's all you need. Like, you don't want the opposite where people are like, well, in the real world, XYZ, in the real world, you wouldn't do this. Like, if it creates a less fun game, then it's usually not a good call to be, but the real world. Anyway, there's like a big GDC talk about the same topic. But yeah, using the real world as a reason to justify a choice, in my opinion, is almost always bad. You should use the arguments like this is more fun, this is more interesting, this looks better. Those are good arguments, but pointing to the real world, I disagree with. So this is a big one. When you are making your space, like you're going from rough out to kind of first block out, first playable, it's really, really hard and really, really tricky and really, really important that you don't, as the designer, over prescribe to art how something is going to look. Because if art looks at the image on the left, they see all these material choices, all these color choices, and all these like flashy lights, and they're like, I don't know how to make this look good. What even is this? Like, I don't understand what this is. Whereas the image on the right, what they've tried to do is they've tried to communicate intent. They've gone, okay, here are these debug materials to clearly say, I don't know what material you're going to put here, you figure it out. But they've tried to be very clear about what do we have here. Like we have a fence, we have some wooden objects, we have some pipes, and the colors that are being used here, usually what I would suggest is like, it's okay to use debug colors that are close to your reference so that people get a sense for the vibe of the space. It's probably better to do that than to have no color, like to be gray. But it's a conversation with your art team on what they would prefer. But I'd be super careful about using materials. Like whenever these days I use like a very complicated mesh that I don't want to have to block out, what I'll do is I'll override the material on it to be a debug material. So that art knows, oh, okay, he did put this like, I don't know, helicopter in his level, but it doesn't have to be that helicopter. Like it can be whatever we want it to be. It's very, very important to not prescribe intent to art because what happens is the opposite of like the blank page problem that art now feels like they have this tiny box that they have to fit inside of. Like these are the only acceptable ideas is whatever looks like the image on the left. Whereas hopefully with the image on the right, they feel a lot more open to kind of go in whatever direction their heart desires, and maybe Neville can kind of yes and or no me on that.
Yes, as we go, I'm constantly typing stuff in where I
Okay.
agree or disagree with you. Most of
Oh,
it I
okay.
agree.
Okay. Well,
And I think one of the coolest things is like, Reinhard, as far as it goes to me, you could be an artist because most of the things you mention, I teach directly about art, the thing about contrast, the thing about affordance, the thing about um, steal, don't copy, all these things.
yes.
I
Yeah, yeah,
love this lecture.
absolutely, absolutely. I would say that a lot of the stuff that I've learned from artists. So that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Good to hear.
But yeah, moving on. So kit pieces. So the example here is a little over the top. I don't do this anymore, but this is a kit piece set that I made for that Uncharted level that you were seeing earlier with the monastery and everything. But basically, what a kit piece is you've kind of baked a static mesh sorry, you've baked a shape into a static mesh that you kind of want to reuse as like a Lego brick like kit piece that you can snap together to like quickly create environments. And the main reason why this is something you'll want is because it kind of creates these limits for yourself to not over noodle on details that aren't necessary yet, right? Let's say you've decided again to make that hotel that we were talking about earlier. If you are limited to this set of objects, you can't go make a little flower pot on a little table in the hall. But if you are just modeling everything in Maya, it's a lot easier to get distracted and to be like, oh, I want to make a cool carpet. And it's like, we don't need a carpet right now. Like that's way too early. We just need to know how many hallways do we have? How big is it? Right? So kit pieces are a really good way to kind of limit yourself. Um, I really like them. There are like a lot of other approaches. Like some people just use cubes that they scale for everything. But I find that like having a little bit more limitation in what is allowed kind of funnels your creativity and makes you more efficient. Um, Again, this one, there's not really a right or wrong answer, but this is about flexibility versus bloat. And what I mean by that is how much should you organize the objects in your outliner? Um, what I usually say is the way where I go more towards one direction is more towards the other is just think of it in terms of time inefficiency. If you are losing a lot of your time trying to find the specific cube, and all of them are called like static cube 537, and you're trying to find the right one and you're losing time, you might need to use folders more and maybe name stuff. If you instead have a bunch of folders, but now every time you have an iteration or you get some feedback, you're spending like way too much time trying to find the right folder and then like copy stuff out of the folder and into the new folder and like it's a whole mess, then maybe things are allowed to be a little bit messier, right? Kind of use that like inefficiency to either be more organized or less organized. And it's kind of, reactive and it's going to change depending on how iterative your environment is. But what I will say is, whenever in doubt, lean towards organization. Because if you have to hand your work over to someone else and they have to now understand, your brainworms and how insane you are, they are probably going to struggle if it's like the image on the right. And they're going to love it if there's some folder structure to help them understand what you're doing. So I lean towards the left, but if you're, losing a lot of time and there's just too much iteration happening, I think it's fine to be a bit messier. So metrics and rulers, you might have had these come by in one of your design lessons. Basically, this is similar to kit pieces, but this is a gameplay version of a kit piece. So a metric is just a number that you've all agreed on what is or isn't allowed to accommodate a certain verb. Like let's say you're a cover shooter, it's like, what do we consider low cover? What do we consider high cover? And most importantly, as you see in this image, what are our buffer zones? Like what are our things where we say, do not make an object that's between this height and this height because it'll confuse players, right? You want to be consistent. You want the player to immediately know whether that's cover or no cover, or whether it's medium cover or high cover. So kind of having these ranges where you're saying like, we only make things this big or that big or that big, but these other ones are illegal, is a good way to kind of help people understand what they can and can't do. So this is kind of affordances that Neville was talking about for a little bit. Now, a version of this that I really like are rulers. So rulers, again, are kind of like kit pieces, but you tend not to keep them in your environment. You kind of like plug them in and then delete them again. But they're a way of very quickly calculating like, oh, is this going to be a fun, comfortable jump? Like, will I be able to like, or if you have like a rocket launcher or something, like, is this within the range before the rocket launcher auto destructs or whatever? Like, could I even hit this shot from this distance? It's a way to like super quickly just test out like, is this going to be comfortable? Is this going to be fun? Is this going to feel good? So one final reminder that when we're in this scale of like, you've made your first rough out, people have approved it, you're starting to make the first version of your level. Again, like I was saying with me being a fan of kit pieces, we are here for scale, not detail, right? We are just here to answer questions about how big is my level, what's in my level, what does the level look like? So it really requires a lot of self-discipline to not over noodle. And also, it requires you not to have too big of an ego to be okay with things looking a little shoddy. Like I'm showing you all these images from the level design that I did. I know this is not the Mona Lisa. I know this is kind of rough, but that's fine. Like we're just here to make a fun video game. We're not here to win any art prizes. That's what our friends over at the art side are going to worry about, right, Neville? Anyway, experiential iteration. So this is the same idea, but from the game side, from the gameplay side. So for me, what you're really trying to do at these early stages when you're building a game on the game side of your level is you are trying to limit imagination. And that sounds weird. You're like, limit imagination? Are we trying to get people to imagine? No, because everyone's going to have a different idea of what this game is. It's so early. We don't know what the game is yet. So what you want is you want everyone to think the game's going to become the same thing, because if people think the game's going to become something different, they're going to get upset later on when you don't make that thing, right? So these are like, how can we, at the very earliest stages, make everyone come to the same page about where we're going. And now the examples I have here on screen, I have on screen because yes, these are released games, but these ideas are pretty easy to prototype. If we go through them one by one, on the left, or top left, all we need is the ability to have a gun that can shoot, multiplayer, like a few people being able to control a character at the same time, and then basically what you want is a big cube in the place of a zombie that can slowly move towards a player's location and then disappear when shot. That's all you need. And now you have zombies. Now you can kind of feel like, is it fun when, we have multiple people who can shoot running around a space as these cubes slowly march towards you? That's all you need. You don't need all the fancy effects. You don't need animation. You don't need all these environment art details. You just need a few cubes, some nav mesh, the ability to shoot a bullet. Again, you don't need a gun. You can just have a cube that's a long stick that fires other small cubes that are bullets. You know what I mean? Like, thinking in terms of low fidelity, how do I translate an idea into its simplest form that we can play test as early as possible is massive. If you don't lose all that time, because the thing is, if you go off and you have your character modeler on the team and they go off and they go build a zombie, you don't even know if that's fun yet. But now this character modeler is spending like their whole year, their whole semester modeling a zombie that you don't even know if you need. Why? Like, you could achieve the same thing with just a cube, right? And you want to get to that gameplay as fast as humanly possible. Anyway, same for these other ideas. I'm kind of running a little late behind on my timer, but just trust me, I can explain later. These other ideas, same thing. You can achieve these with just cubes in a dream and a little bit of code. So this is me kind of talking about on the gameplay side, when you have like environmental storytelling, when you have this kind of idea for a space. Environmental storytelling is not the skeleton on the couch with a hat on and a little teddy bear next to him. That, if anything, is like a joke. It's like a gag. It's like, haha, isn't it funny? This guy died in a trench coat with sunglasses and a bunch of money. But it's like, this is not telling me anything. Like, there's no story here. I don't know this guy. I don't know why he had a bunch of money. Like, to me, this is not interesting. So it's like, how can we use our environments to kind of actually tell a story? And so I think for me, when you're trying to accommodate that, when you're scripting in these early stages, what you're really looking for is the really basic shit. You're just looking for a trigger box. Like, you're just looking of like, I walk into a room and now this dialogue plays, or I walk into a room and now this enemy shows up, or I walk into a room and now the ceiling collapses, right? So from the perspective of scripting that you need at this early stage, again, try to think as small scale as possible. What's the shittiest way I can do this? Like, what's the easiest, quickest way I can just get the point across, right? Throw a little dialogue text on screen instead of having the character, narrate it, whatever. Like, similar thing, like if you have like unlockables or pickups or spawns, like enemies that can spawn in places, I don't need like a whole spawn setup to be coded by a programmer. I just need, again, a cube that I can define a transform and say, oh, when I press this button or when I hit this trigger box, the cube appears. That's all I need, right? So kind of thinking in that realm of like, what's the absolute most simplest way I can get my point across is vital at this stage. And similarly, if you think about like, having enemies that you patrol around in a stealth setup, or having like platforming challenges where you can kind of like navigate around a space, It's just cubes and splines. Like, you know, being able to move stuff on splines, being able to move stuff back and forth between set points. That's the sort of thing that you'll want to be scripting at this stage. If you're doing really, really complicated things with like, oh, the enemy can recognize whether you're behind cover 50% and your legs sticking out, and they can investigate the noise and go over there, like, that's way too complex. We don't need that yet, right? So kind of being able to kind of investigate and arrest your own ideas in the realm of, do we need all this complexity to prove whether or not this is fun? And often the answer is no, there's a simpler way. Now, this is another slide that I think is incredibly important. I've been running into this problem a lot at work, and I've kind of come up with this triangle. You may be familiar with the triangle that's like cheap, good, or fast. And then everyone's joke is like, haha, pick two, you can't do three, it's impossible. Well, this is similar. I call this speed, fidelity, and function, except if you want to be good at your job, you're going to have to do all three, and it's a tightrope and it's a balance. So, what do I mean when I say speed, fidelity, and function? When you make a level, you obviously want that job to be done fast. That's the speed component. It's just like, I have finished making the level, it's now ready for feedback, it's ready to be reviewed. What I mean when I say fidelity, it's kind of that visual art side of things where I'm talking about, does everybody understand what this is going to look like? Does everybody understand that it's a bank, that it's a vault? Does everyone understand where the vault is? Does everybody understand, you know, that this is the area where we're going to interact, that this is the area where the boss is going to spawn? Function is kind of the gameplay side of this. Like, does everybody understand, you know, what, or sorry, does it have the functionality needed for me to have the experience that is going to let us understand whether this is fun or not? So this is kind of like, can I press the shoot button and does a bullet come out? Can I press the jump button and the character jumps? The reason why I say this is a tightrope is because, at least in my career, whenever I've only focused on two out of the three, the third is going to cause problems. And those problems will take the shape of, for example, someone saying, oh, we're not going to be able to finish this mission on time, speed. Like, we're going to have to cut scope. Like, we're going to have to get rid of half the level. Now, if that happens, that may break your whole level. Like, it may no longer work. It may no longer be fun just because someone's like, oh, we're not going to be able to finish this on time. If it breaks because of fidelity, then people don't understand your vision. They don't understand what the level's going to look like, and they're going to have all these different ideas of what the level's going to look like. And, you know, for example, the cohesion's not going to be there. It's going to look weird, or whatever. Art's going to just be like, well, this is impossible. Like, what are you asking me to do? If it doesn't work on the function side of things, you're going to get feedback along the lines of like, this isn't fun. Like, I'm not having a good time. I'm just walking and pressing E. Like, I don't understand how this level is ever going to work. So yeah, have fun on the tightrope. I'm sorry, I'm going like way over. Player guidance. I'll see if I can speed through a bit more. If you have basically a level that looks like this, right? It's relatively big, relatively empty, and you're getting feedback from your artists or maybe like from your directors or whatever that's like, man, it's so empty. Can we put a few more props in here? I would urge a little bit of caution and a little bit of pushback. It's a lot easier to fill in a space with objects to make it feel full. It's a lot harder to make a small space bigger by bringing out all the walls. So when you're at this early stage and art hasn't had a chance to kind of do a pass on the space, it's usually better if it feels a little bit too big than if it feels a little bit too small. Um, but one big thing that will help you with this is to think of your environment in terms of paths, not spaces. So what do I mean by this? If we take an apartment building as an example, and we have a linear level where you kind of start at the beginning of the apartment building, you go through the apartment building, and then you come out the other end. You may be tempted to look at references of real apartment buildings and kind of copy them and then try to make a level that has you walk through a real apartment complex. But if you look at the example on the right from Silent Hill, when we have a level taking place in an apartment building, the actual player experience, if it's a somewhat linear game, is a path. It's not a bunch of spaces. So if you did the example on the left, you'd have all these extra rooms that we don't need, and that also will probably create a very unfun environment for you to traverse around, because in the real world, all the staircases are above each other. right? So you're going to do a whole lot of like backing up above yourself, and then maybe you investigate one apartment. Well, they're all dead ends, so they don't flow very well. You have to double back on yourself all the time. So rather than thinking, oh, my level takes place in an apartment building, let's look at layouts for a real apartment building. No, you're creating a video game, right? So it's kind of like a theme park ride. Like you don't want to build a real apartment building. You want to create an interesting route that takes us through spaces that make sense to have been inside of an apartment building. So the most realistic way you would do this is you would take the image on the left, you'd kind of draw a path through it, and you'd like break a bunch of the walls or something, and you'd kind of, this is why there's so many post-apocalyptic games, because they're great for level design. Like if you just punch a bunch of holes into the wall, you can get a very realistic looking space that has a very interesting path for us to take, where we like go straight through someone's bedroom, and then the bathroom, and then the hallway, and then the staircase, and then the elevator, or whatever, right? But you could also do the example on the right where it doesn't have to be destroyed. You just bend reality a little bit. You just make the corridor way longer than it would be in real life, and you just put the room in an unrealistic position in real life, because the player is not double checking your work. They're not like checking the floor plan to make sure that you built a real building. They're just there to have a good time. Anyway, I'm I'm doing my best to speed through. Uh, Minimum clearance. So for what I mean when I say minimum clearance, this is like how much free space do I need between objects that have collision for me to comfortably navigate. Now, the example up here is from State of Decay 2, which, like I said, I worked on State of Decay 3. A big problem we ran into is because it's set in like, small town America, all of the architecture is relatively small. And so all the furniture is relatively tight tucked together. And so there's not a lot of space for you to kind of navigate. Now, to some extent, that's interesting and fun because you're a zombie game and like, tension and blah, blah. But I don't really enjoy getting stuck because there's a chair behind me that I didn't see. And I feel like most players don't really enjoy that either. So I was doing a lot to kind of push them into having more minimum clearance so that it would be less people getting frustrated about objects they couldn't see behind them, and more people kind of focusing on the navigating around and shooting zombies. The example below is from Ghost Recon Breakpoint, where again, theming to scale, we had kind of this like Elon Musk-esque like island in New Zealand where everything was grand and beautiful and futuristic architecture, and so we had that minimum clearance that we needed so that interiors felt good to play. So framing goals. What I'm talking about here is when you have somewhat of a linear game, or even if you have an open world game, if you have kind of funnels and you know where the player's probably roughly going to be when they look at a big area of your game, you can think about kind of framing goals, by which I mean kind of giving the player hints of where they're supposed to go next and what they want to do next. So in this case, even though players may not pick up on all three goals, I'm framing all three goals, and hopefully when they see them again later on, they'll kind of, it'll eventually click. Now the short-term goal obviously is the most important one because that's literally where we're going to go next. But the medium-term goal is like an optional thing for them to see through like a broken part of the ceiling of like, oh, okay, that's where I'm going to want to head next. And then the long-term goal is more of a hint of me saying, hey, see that thing in the background? Yeah, that's part of the level. We're going to go there after, right? So these are ways to kind of tell people um, where we're going to go, and maybe like give them tips on how they're going to achieve their next goals, or what challenge they need to overcome. So boundaries. So boundaries is basically like if you have an open world, especially, but sometimes also in a single player level, if you have places the player's not supposed to go, like, how are you going to stop them from going there? Some examples are, of course, like the spike pit of death, or the Breath of the Wild kind of wall of sand that kind of pushes you back, and the character says something like, or like the message says something like, the wind is blowing too hard, you have to turn back. Um, Think about how are you creating boundaries for the player in your space? What are you doing to keep them in? And how can you make that not feel frustrating? A problem I had on the project I worked with Hangar 13 on was we didn't have spike pits, we didn't have respawns. So, and we had a game about platforming, which was a networked game about platforming. So anytime I created any sort of jump, if the player missed that jump, I now had to level design the space where they landed. And then it was like, oh, well, now have fun creating a whole bunch of staircases for them to get back up again. right? So thinking about like, okay, what happens if the player, doesn't do what I want them to do? How do I make sure that that's an enjoyable experience? That's what designing boundaries are for. And basically, in the case of the Hangar 13 game, I pushed really hard for us to have like, respawn points and pits of death. And that helped a lot when we finally had those. So if you've made an environment and you're kind of play testing it and you're like, oh, that feels pretty good to me. If you want to kind of do the next step of thinking like, is this going to be fun for a player? You know exactly where to go in your level because you built it, right? Like you're happy taking 6 90-degree turns or whatever. But if you want to get a sense of how a real person is going to play your game and you don't have access to play testers, the next best thing that I recommend to people is single stick testing. So single stick testing is where you basically are not allowed to touch the camera, right? Just pretend you're in like Ocarina of Time and there's no enemy for you to Z target, right? If you just have the movement stick, what this will now do to you is you now have to ask yourself, whenever I can no longer just walk forward, what's the thing that's making the player understand where they have to turn to? Right? Is it a gentle curve in the room that's kind of like bending at like 45 degrees or less? Is it like a big light that's like kind of flashing to be like, ooh, there's something interesting around the corner? Is it like an enemy that's like running past from left to right, making them go, oh, I want to follow that enemy? But kind of ask yourself and arrest yourself, why does the player know they are supposed to turn the camera? And if your answer is, well, because it's a dead end, okay, but now you've created kind of this annoying, like friction-filled game where people are going to spend a lot of their time wondering, like, well, where am I supposed to go? And if you're ever in doubt, you can just A/B test this and figure it out for yourself. Create 2 levels, one where you single stick test, one where you don't, and then ask people to play them and ask which one they like more. I'm gonna guess that the single stick test one wins every time. But yeah, that's just a tip. So final section. I know I'm like way over. Let's talk cubes. So this is more my section about like actual in-editor tips of things you can do. So if you want to get good, I'm not saying that I'm get good, but that I'm good, but maybe I'll get there. Um, so in Unreal, I don't really like how Unreal does this. I know you have the grouping mechanic that you can use. I don't like it because it puts the pivot in like an arbitrary spot. But I do think it's very important to group your objects if you're like ever moving them around. I tended to use folder structures like you see in the top right screen here. Unreal has this cool feature of like level instancing, which you can use to kind of almost like do a group or a prefab in a world. I think the only problem with like level instancing is that it's not very flexible. Like if you had 5 houses and you wanted to kind of shift the interiors between them, level instancing would require you to make 5 level instances. So for me, what I do in Unreal is I work with folder structures, and once the layout has kind of settled and we're kind of happy with it, then I might transition to like a level instance or something. But yeah, in the editor that I'm working in now, which is not Unreal, we have really good grouping functionality, so I love using groups. But whatever you have access to, it'll save you a bunch of time trying to like select every object that you need to move. Um, so scaling kit pieces. Remember how I was talking about like using kit pieces? For a long time in that image you saw, I really told myself to not scale anything. So I would just create every variant. I'd create a 1x1 piece, a 1x4 piece, a 4x1 piece, etc. As a way to kind of stop myself from being over indexing on details. I kind of stepped away from that, especially now that I've had to make very round levels, which are very hard to do in that type of context. So I'm allowing myself to scale stuff, and it does mean you need way fewer kit pieces, which is good. Like, you're seeing here, you can turn these 3 shapes into a lot of other shapes. But it does require more discipline, right? If you're scaling stuff, trying to make sure that you don't use it to create really tiny details or use a million cubes objects where that level of detail really isn't necessary. So when you are like assembling an environment, I think if it's like a playable space, so it's like the walls of a house or something, the walls of a building that you're in, I really prefer kind of tiling my kit pieces, by which I mean, for the most part, you just have your 4x4 wall or whatever, and you kind of copy paste that around instead of what you're seeing on the right, or sorry, I think I reversed it. Yeah, on the left, you're seeing the other one, which is scaling, where you take one piece and you scale it all the way to be as big as you need it to be. The reason I tend not to do that for this type of thing is if you change where you want the door, where you want the window, or whatever, now you have to fiddle with all these scales and set them correctly. Whereas if they're all uniform, it's very easy to just kind of delete one and duplicate the other and kind of work like that. Anyway, if this all sounds super obvious, I'm sorry. I just wanted to be thorough. Pivots. So again, I've been going back and forth on this for years now, trying to figure out what's better. The answer, as always, is it depends. Wow, shocker. Um, but what I will say is a little bit of a guideline for you is if you're doing a lot of rotating things around, again, making like rounder shapes, for example, or if it's like interior walls, I like centered pivots when you are creating very big shapes and you're kind of blocking out large areas quickly, like let's say like a city and you wanted to make like skyscraper cubes, then I really like the corner pivot. Because the corner pivot, it's way easier to like quickly make something scale and have, one side of it always in the same space. Whereas the centered pivot is way better if you want to kind of rotate things around or if you need the walls to be equally offset on both sides because they're both playable, that sort of thing. Anyway, the answer is it depends. I know it's boring. I'm sorry. Um, One more thing I want to tell you is that when you are working with, something as simple as a wall piece, if you offset your pivot by even just like selecting another object, like I'm doing here with the cylinder, you can create all kinds of fun shapes. So there's also, I think, an indie game that kind of illustrates this idea very well. But basically, like get a little creative with like offset grids. Again, I don't know if this is obvious or if this is news to y'all, but the image in the bottom right is basically created out of just wall pieces, like just flat wall pieces, by just doing a little bit of rotating with offset pivots. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do there. Um, Similarly, this one I haven't heard anybody talk about, so I feel like a genius. Maybe I'm an idiot. I don't know. You tell me. But broken squares. It's this idea where if you want to integrate multiple shapes inside of other shapes, because in level design, a lot of the time when we block stuff out, we need people to not get stuck. We need people to not hang on like a little bit sticking out. So it's kind of important that everything's flush and nice to play. So broken squares are a way where you basically just take two triangles and use them to make almost a square that's like a little bit smaller, so that you can neatly integrate, let's say, a staircase into a cylinder. Um, and then finally, if you want to kind of have a bunch of different objects that need to be on top of each other, you can use Z layering to create all kinds of interesting visual patterns. If you want to, for example, make like a carpet on the floor, or if you want to have like, a cool decal running along the floor and you want to think that you're an environment artist, then, Z layering is just a way to kind of either play with the scale or play with the positioning so that one piece is slightly above or below another piece, just like you would do in Photoshop with like layers and masks. But yeah, you can do all sorts of fun stuff with that. Anyway, that's it. I'm sorry I went way over. That wasn't my plan. But if you like this talk and you want me to come back sometime, here are like 4 other topics that I wanted to cover but didn't have time for. So I cut like, I don't know, 3/4 of my slides. That's it. Thank you. Any questions?